guess I could minimize that. But this is A1C. This is the right at the first of the code, and it's talking about rehabilitation counselors assist clients in understanding potential constraints of employment and placement choices. And really, that is the heart of our work, isn't it? We're looking at how we can help people go to work. And in this class, we're talking about how we can do that ethically and the rules and laws we follow to do that. D2, cultural competence. D section in the code is all about the and I hope that all of y'all, when you went through your master's, you probably had a class on cultural issues. I didn't. I'm that old. They added them after I finished. But it certainly helps to understand different cultures and how to address those differences and how to work with all kinds of people. That's what we're all about, isn't it? And the code in D1B suggests that the specialty areas, and I'll bet a bunch of y'all work in specialty areas, or what is called specialty areas. It's that you have core competencies and practicing only having obtained appropriate consultation, education, and training, and or supervised experience. So we all do that when we go through our internship, don't we? And get some experience. Do you feel like that got you ready to be a counselor? I felt like that missed a lot of things when I went through my program and then went through my internship. I wasn't really ready to be a counselor. It's such a varied job. You have so many things you have to do. There's no way they can add all of that. I would think we would be at school a long time, wouldn't we? So a lot of us learn on the job, and we can use this code. As long as we can follow this code, we're okay to do that, aren't we? We can make sure that we are following the ethical guidelines by understanding the code. And we want to avoid value imposition, and that is what the code in I think it was 2010 was it the last time it was done? Let's see. No, well, it started then, but it became effective January the 1st, 2017. And that is the code that they really put the stress on avoiding value imposition. And we all know how important that is. And in order to be ethical, we have got to remember to do this. Rehabilitation counselors are aware and avoid imposing their own values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Rehabilitation counselors respect the diversity of clients and seek training in areas in which they are at risk of imposing their values onto clients, especially when the rehabilitation counselor's values are inconsistent with the client's goals or are discriminatory in nature. Have you run across a example of your values were totally different from what the client wanted to do? Can you think of an example? Would somebody like to share? And please feel free to use your microphone and talk to me. I would love that. It's so much easier than typing in the chat box, but use the chat box if that's what you're more comfortable with. But please share.
Peggy, earlier, Terry Murphy said that internship was very topical when you reference about the training on cultural.
Yeah.
And then Julie Bailey also said classwork is very different than actual real life counseling.
Yes, I tell you, I agree with that. It gives you some hint as to what you're facing, but it doesn't prepare you well, ready to go to work that first day, does it? It's a definitely work in progress. And the more years you stack up as a counselor, the more experienced you become. And that makes you a very valuable team member. Attitudinal barriers. We're working, trying to lower those all the time, aren't we? And if we start out with some, that would be hard. Rehabilitation counselors address these and inhibit the growth and development of their clients, including stereotyping and discrimination. And that is one of the things that make our job so hard is the discrimination and the stereotyping. When you go out and talk to an employer and they have the wrong ideas about what you do and about your clients. Once when I was a counselor, I talked to the manager of a plant. It was a sewing plant, I think. And he said, well, all your clients are drug addicts and alcoholics. I don't want those people working for me. And that was his attitude. And it was impossible. I tried to change his attitude. He didn't realize that maybe a fourth of the people that worked for him were my clients, and they were not drug addicts and alcoholics. And if they were in treatment. And they were his employees, very good employees. But of course, I didn't tell him that because that would be breaking confidentiality. But he just looked at it like, because it said rehab, he interpreted the word rehab to mean that's what we were doing. That's only one barrier that you're facing out there, isn't it? Does somebody want to give me an example of a barrier, attitudinal barrier you have faced, and maybe, hopefully, an example of gotten over it or done away with it?
From the chat, Terry Williams Murphy says, I think we need to be very careful to know the difference between imposing our values from being a rehab professional and letting a client know that something they may be interested in may not be the best choice for them based on all the information gathered on them.
Okay. Would you like to elaborate on that? That sounds interesting. Okay, I have an example for you. I would like to know what you think about this. Mary has decided to go to work, and she has worked for many years before retiring as a nurse. So she has a good set of skills, doesn't she? But tells you that she cannot do this type of work because of physical problems of limiting standing, walking, and some slight cognitive problems. We run into those sometimes as we get older, don't we? We find that she is unable to live on her SSDS payments and applies to VR for assistance as a person with a disability. So Mary states that she doesn't want to go to work, but feels like she doesn't have a choice. She needs more income to pay for her insurance and medication. Mary is a first-generation American and speaks English with a heavy accent. Mary has a daughter and 5 grandchildren who live with her, and she provides child care, except when the children are in school. Are you thinking about how you can help Mary? Now, this is our observation of Mary when she comes to meet with us. Mary presents as a very depressed, anxious, negative person. So her situation is impacting her, and she may have problems with depression beyond situational. Mary has difficulty walking, and she uses a walker for balance. So we're going to have to think about what type of accommodation there, or if walking is something that she will be able to do, maybe not. Mary has some difficulty filling out her work history due to memory problems, she states. Okay, where are we with that? What are you thinking? And where do you think you could run into problems with the culture? Could there be cultural questions here that we have to think about and remind ourselves that it may be a cultural difference or a gender difference? What do you think? Would somebody like to go ahead?
Yeah, I was gonna give your comments in the chat box. Valencia Wilson said a culture of a certain profession, that's a hard one. And then Terry Williams Murphy says, I think some counselors want to give the client what they want, even though in the end it may be setting them up for failure. Our job as a rehab counselor is to evaluate the data and steer them in the direction that is more in line with their strengths, abilities, and needs.
Thank you, Terry. And I want to point out that we talked about that yesterday, that when we set a client up for failure because of our incompetence or our cultural misunderstanding, we're not being ethical, are we? We are breaking a principle because we are harming a client. What assumptions do you think somebody could make about Mary that might send them in the wrong direction? The first thing that comes to my mind is we might say, well, why are you're taking care of your grandchildren? Your daughter should be just paying you for that, and you wouldn't have to get a job. Maybe we could help you with that. And I think an enterprising voc rehab counselor might want to go that direction. Help you with some accommodations to better care for your grandchildren. And what do you think about that?
Hi, Peggy. This is Neil. I'm not necessarily in agreement with you on that.
Okay, what do you disagree with on that, Neil? Do you don't think that somebody would go in that direction, or that wouldn't necessarily be the wrong direction?
No, I think that might be some sort of value that maybe we're placing on her, and maybe we would need to explore with Mary really what her interests are. Her interests might be absolutely not to be working with her grandchildren. So,
right.
You know.
And I think too, I had in the back of my mind, it might be part of her culture that a grandmother just takes care of grandchildren, and that is not your job, but that is what you do as part of your lifestyle. I know it is for me. And for some people that works like that, and other people it doesn't. It's a cultural thing, I think, but I can see how if you didn't think about that, you could misunderstand it, couldn't you? Mary has said that she wants a job, so maybe she don't want to stay home and take care of children. And we could put some value or think that she just doesn't want to work by taking care of her children. I know a lot of people get that idea when the mother is home with their children, that maybe she doesn't want to work, and maybe she doesn't. But we put all kinds of values, positive and negative, on some of that stuff, don't we? And it is an area, I'm just pointing out, I don't think I'm doing it very well, that we need to remember to not to be judgmental, or not to put our value weights on yes or no. What would be the first thing you would do, Neil, to help Mary? What would be the first thing you would do?
Okay. It's possible that an assessment, a cognitive assessment, might be necessary,
Okay.
but I think some vocational exploration, where maybe being able to utilize her background as a retiring nurse,
Right.
in some sort of way where she can be comfortable, and even possibly working from home. There's an awful lot to explore there, but the first thing for me might be a cognitive assessment. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, you at least know where what you were dealing with, and give her an idea of how hard it, or what kind of accommodations she needed in that area.
Yes, ma'am.
Does anybody else have any suggestions?
I was going to suggest an interest test, at least some kind of interest assessment, to find out what you really like to do. I don't know what the options would be, but I think that's where you'd start. Find out what good to find out what her physical and mental functioning is like. But once you get that, and interests, I think that's all part of an assessment that probably needs to be taken right at the.
Thank you, Gina. Yeah,
right at the outset.
Anybody else have something you want to add? Do you think that would be an example maybe of where some people, some voc rehab counselors might go off the page, or is it pretty clear that you've got to watch here and make sure that you don't? Or is it so general, you figure this is just another client, and we're going to do it this way, and I don't have to worry about my values, pressing my values on Mary? Which one is it for you? Do you think there's a danger there? Yes or no?
Sure, there's a danger there. There's age, there's language. So you've really got to be able to suspend judgment. But yeah, there are dangers there.
Great, thank you, Neil. So that's what we think. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say the first thing that caught my eye when you first mentioned this is that here is an ex-nurse, a nurse who has heavy accent with English, to me, there's kind of of course, it's likely that she, I'm not saying that's impossible to find. I'm just wondering, somebody who has the qualifications to become a nurse, and I see that as a fairly educated, skilled position.
Right.
And for her to acquire that must have taken some ability and cognitive ability and physical ability and aptitude that to me, I see it probably prevent me from thinking too much about her accent, frankly.
Okay. You don't see that will be a limitation for her. I simply threw that in to be to trip you up on thinking about who she was. And I agree with you. I don't see as that will be a problem for her. It might, but
this is Jim. I see that
Okay.
also it possibly could be an asset, especially like in
Yeah.
Northwest Arkansas, and especially now that we have with COVID and all the telehealth and different options that people have. Some of those other barriers that are listed might not be so much of a barrier, because if you're not physically having to walk and move around to deal with patients,
Right.
you can sit and talk with folks. She could still be in the nursing field.
Right. So it might be an asset. And that's the other side of when we're talking about culture, is there's a lot of things that can be that will be an asset in certain fields. And if we don't value them, then we are not going to assess the client correctly, are we, for a job? Okay. Let's look at Jack.
Also, Peggy, I'm sorry, Terry said right now she could be a nurse in telehealth medicine.
Right. She might come in really handy now that we can't move around and see people. So some of her limitations might be an advantage. When I was a counselor, Jack here is sort of on one of my clients that I had. I had a lot of paper haulers. I was out in the country that didn't have a lot of formal education. So if something happened to where they couldn't do this paperwood hauler business, sometimes they were left with no work. They would come to me, and they didn't have an education or any kind of training except this, and we would rack our brains trying to come up with something they could do in the field because they liked the field. It's all they knew. They wanted to stay there. When I look at this, and when I look back on my work, I think, well, did I just look at them as a paperwood hauler, and that's all they could do is drive the truck and haul this paperwood? Did I put them in that peg? Maybe. These examples are to get you to think. It's not to say this is the way it should be done, because you probably know more about that than I do. But the only way we can learn ethics and get better at our ethical behavior is to look at examples, talk about them, and see what everybody thinks about them. Or that is my way of thinking. But I looked at this, and I would be really excited to hear your comments on it. he's a paper wood hauler, as I said. He has done this work since he left high school in 1982, after he completed junior high. So he does not have a high school education. An accident at work caused him to lose his right arm, and his right arm is the dominant arm. And his employer let him go because he cannot keep his license to drive that size truck. He received a settlement from workers' comp, which he's been living on for the past 8 months. And sometimes we attach values and condemnation to people who don't hop right back in that training program and get back to work, don't we? Now he desperately needs a job. And that's when a lot of clients would come to me. They were desperately needing a job because their money had run out. And I would be sitting there thinking, why didn't they come and see me 5 months ago? Well, that is a value, isn't it? That is placing values on other people's decisions, rightly or wrongly. He has no other resources, and he has a wife and 3 children whom he supports. So tell me, what is your thoughts on Jack? Where are our hot points? I told you where mine were.
Question is, what is a paper wood hauler?
I'm sorry. Well, the question is, where do we need to be careful about making our, I don't know,
Peggy,
our culture?
Peggy, one of the questions in the chat is, do you know what a paper wood hauler is? Can you explain that?
Oh, I'm sorry. The state I come from, it is a very common job. I'm sorry. A paper wood hauler is the truck driver that drives the paper wood truck. Paper wood is usually pine trees, real long pine trees, and they put them on the back of a truck, stack them up, and the hauler is the person who drives the truck out of the woods where they put the trees on there and drives it to the mill. And then it's unloaded, and he drives, or she drives it back to the woods and fills it up. They do that all day. And so they're mainly a truck driver. But if you've ever been driving in the country and you got behind one of these paper wood trucks, you know it looks like it's very difficult to drive them. You have to be ready because I have heard of the logs coming loose and falling off, and you have to be careful how you turn the truck because it'll turn over because it's heavy on the back, and it may not be equal in weight, stacked properly. So you do have to have some skills, but that is a paper wood hauler.
Peggy, is your question related to a cultural issue in this?
Yes.
I'm not so sure I see so much cultural problem here. I do see how you could be maybe judgmental about his education. Maybe if he has a background that's more rural country, not very sophisticated, not very social, or if the fact that he's been on workers' compensation for some time, there are people that might get the perception that he's a abuser, without knowing the facts, that kind of thing. If that's where you're going with that.
Okay. Right. That's what I'm talking about. Do you see that could lead to wrong decisions? Or do you think it would? How can you keep from going in that direction? How do we want to make sure that Jack gets all of the help we can give him to go in any direction. Do you think he needs probably upfront some education as far as other jobs are concerned, since he doesn't know about other jobs?
Valencia says vocational evaluation to determine other skills, abilities, to seek employment or training.
Okay, yes. I think that would probably be our first way to go, instead of zeroing in on the skills that he has currently.
And of course,
what do you think?
I was going to
go ahead.
add, I was just going to add to that. Of course, you'd want to know what he'd be willing to do too. He sounds like he's desperate to get a job, which means he's desperate for money right now. That might not be conducive to training or upgrading his skills and abilities to the point where he could actually earn more money than he did before, or even maybe as much as he did before, if he's not willing to do make an investment in his own education, or if he's capable of educating. You know, I mean, there's a lot of questions you have to answer.
Okay. The point I'm making, and I think you made it well, is that are you willing to look at Jack as a well-rounded person? Are you just going to zero in on his past? He's a wood hauler, doesn't have education. Can we build on the education he has? I know it would be a problem for me, because I would think, well, if he'd come a few months ago when he had some income coming in, we could have done some training and then I would go down that trail. Well, there's no need to go down that trail. That's in the past, isn't it? Now we're at a new point, and we are to where we've got to get a job as fast as possible. How do we do that?
One more comment, and that's from Terry Williams Murphy. It says to stay at the current employer, he could be a trainer for new employees that rides in the truck with him, or a scheduler for the truck, since he knows how long everything takes. And he says, sorry if that isn't related to what you're asking. He was looking, or she was looking at transferable skills.
Yes, that is good. Thank you for pointing that out. That would be a place that you could look if Jack is interested in staying in that particular culture, work culture. That would be a good way to keep him where he feels comfortable, wouldn't it? Does anybody else have anything they want to add? We will go to Vicki. Vicki's a VR counselor with a large caseload. She's the type of counselor who has her paperwork in order and filed in the right place, completely opposite of me when I was working. She follows all the policy and procedures of the agency. I try to. And on Tuesday of each week, Vicki does intake. She has all the forms pulled and ready for the applicant when she comes into her office. And this past Wednesday, Vicki was reading the files before her supervisor came in to conduct a file review for the month. And she noticed that her client, Ashley, did not initial the application on the back, signifying that Vicki told her about CAP and gave her a brochure for policy. As she had a long conversation with her client about her rights and about CAP, Vicki was sure this was just an oversight on Ashley's part. Vicki decided to initial the form for her client rather than ask her to come back in the office, as travel was hard for Ashley. You are Vicki's co-worker and you observe these actions. What are you saying to Vicki about these actions? This is not a cultural thing. This is where would you find guidance for it in the code? That's what we'll be talking about tomorrow.
Terry says you are saying it was okay and it isn't. Also on the previous slide, Valencia says some people suggest some personal adjustment counseling for, I think, Jack, in order to deal with a new disability impairment.
Oh, thank you. So you would talk to Vicki and explain that that is not okay, not to do that. But how would you suggest that Vicki fix the problem? Should her client, Ashley, be asked to come back in to sign, to initial that form because the agency needs the initial, or would that be unethical?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be unethical to have the client come back and sign the form. My thought would be to make it as convenient as possible, like for the next visit the client makes to the office, have her go back and initial the form.
Yes, I think if she was coming in for something else and you went back and had it initialed, that would be ethical. But to have her travel in just to initial that, in my opinion, would be unethical if it's hard for her to travel, like she has to take several buses or get someone to drive her. We shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
You have a couple of comments that says, starting with Terry, you could do a case note. And Jennifer Hawkins says Vicki can take the form to her. Julie Bailey also says she should offer to take the form out to the client. And Valencia says, I would call the client and inform about CAP and omitting the signature initials, and I would mail it to her.
Okay, so there's several ways that we can fix that without being completely overt wrong, huh? I appreciate the suggestions. What do you think that you, as Vicki's coworker, what should you do at this point? You've made the suggestions to Vicki. Should you, well, you tell me what you should do. Let's say
if you know it.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, if you know it to be unethical to do it any other way, then, I mean, especially if it's I think we've already talked about all the ways that you could get that signature ethically. I think that would be ethically to do that. If you are watching her do it wrongly, then you have an obligation to speak up. And that is in the code to do that. If you've witnessed somebody doing something
totally unethical.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you pointed that out. And I'm glad you pointed out that there is a place in the code to find guidance, because that's what tomorrow's discussion is going to be about. Where do we find our answers in the code? And I think that is important, because we know the code's there, but if we have to sit down and read the entire code every time we have a question, it's not very practical to use it, is it? So we're going to have a contest, and I'll tell you about it in the morning, simply because I don't want people to go and find the answers today. We'll give everybody a fighting chance here. We'll talk about it first thing in the morning. There is a prize, okay? There's a prize for winning. Does anybody else have anything you want to add to Vicki? Let's at least give Vicki, we understand why she wants to do that. She likes to be, get the details right. That is a good work ethic there. But we need to have a conversation with her about the importance of not doing that, and why it would be okay if her supervisor has something to say about her missing initial.
Julie Bailey asked a question, has she done this in the past?
Well, that would be something we wouldn't know unless we had seen her do it. But that would be a question if you were a coworker and you saw her do this, you'd want to ask, have you done this in the past? And you do know that that's unethical and it's not fair to your client because that's not her initials. And it completely destroys confidentiality. Make sure she understands how important it is not to do that, I would think. Can anybody else tell me a better way or a way that you would handle that? Some of you who are supervisors, have you ever faced that before? Okay, let's talk. We'll talk about Paulette. She's a supervisor for a VR region, and she's got 20 counselors and 20 caseloads, and each caseload is altogether is more than 3,000 clients. And she's been receiving complaints from the clients that the counselors are not making timely appointments. Sometimes clients have to wait 3 months to see a counselor for an intake interview. And I realize that that's not that long, is it? She is aware of the counselor schedules and workload, and she knows that they are working to capacity. Eric, the training manager, has developed a training curriculum on motivational interviewing that will last for at least 3 months and take 3 days off the counselor's time a month. That's a lot of time, isn't it? And this training will refresh counseling skills and possibly improve the relationships between the counselors and the clients. Of course, that's a very positive thing. That's something we want to do. But Paulette is afraid that it would be unethical to send all the counselors to the training when the outcome is clients having to wait longer to be served. Now, as a supervisor, how would you solve this dilemma? Or is it a dilemma for you?
Terry says, I would request a new counselor position.
So, hi, this is Neil. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is Neil. I don't see this as a dilemma, and I would probably suggest that, I don't know, 4 or 5 of my counselors who are up to date with their cases, maybe they can afford a couple of days, and I would be rotating my staff. But I don't see it as a big dilemma.
So you wouldn't send all of them to the training?
No, I would not.
Okay. Anyone else? Connie is a general caseload VR counselor, and she has a transition student, John, who is a college student. John is being diagnosed with learning disabilities and a severe personality disorder. John comes from a very poor family, and his mother needs John to help care for his disabled grandfather so she can work and support the family. This entails John getting up several times throughout the night taking care of his grandfather. And this leads to John having difficulty getting to classes every day. I think that's all of it. What do you think of this? What would be, well, we'll just go on and read it all. John is not compliant with his VR program as he doesn't have transportation. and the only way Connie can see John is to make an appointment when she can go pick him up and give him a ride to the office and then back home. Connie does not see this as a hardship for her, as John lives a couple of miles from the office. But Connie's supervisor, Betty, points out to Connie that this is unethical, and it could be problematic if she were to have an accident. And Betty says this is a dual relationship, and Connie is showing favoritism to John. So we're pointing out a couple of problems with it right there. Connie thinks that it would be unethical not to give John a ride, as he would have to drop out of his VR program, and therefore this action would be harmful to John. What are your thoughts on Betty and John? Do you agree with the supervisor?
Yes, Neil says this is unethical, can't be doing this.
Okay. What do you do about Connie's concern? She thinks it would be unethical to just drop him now because she's got into this, hasn't she? And now, if she doesn't give him a ride, he can't complete his program.
Julie suggests to put in his case to provide transportation funds. And Terry also says, is there no other transportation, such as a cab or a bike?
Okay. So you see it as an ethical problem that just needs to be solved now. Do you address anything that's happened before? What would you do about that if you were the supervisor?
Terry says it's definitely an ethical problem.
Okay. Tell me the principles that you think are in jeopardy here.
It could be justice in that you're doing something for this client that you're not going to do for others.
Great. I'm glad you pointed that out. That's true. Is there harm to the client?
I'd say that is not an issue. And in fact, I would say you have a beneficence you're complying with. You could make an argument in that direction.
Okay. Now,
I think I was going to go on. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, what would happen, do you think, if Connie stops picking him up? And she thinks that would be unethical. Do you agree with her? Or not?
Are you asking me or just everybody?
You.
If there was, I agree with what the previous statements were, that if you can find other transportation sources, and surely most places you go, you can find other ways to do it. It is not good policy to have your counselor driving clients. But I don't think that's so much an ethical issue as it would be against policy. Insurance, liability, those kind of issues are probably more of a concern to a supervisor with a counselor extending himself personally with a client. They have had counselors, we've had counselors in the past that drive state vehicles that are already insured and take clients places that they're scheduled to do, and it's just part of the plan. But to do it in their personal vehicle, I don't think is wise for liability reasons.
Okay. So it would be unethical because it's against policy. And that is unethical to go against policy as long as policy is ethical. And that would certainly be an ethical concern, wouldn't it?
And Neil also says it is an ethical and a counseling issue. You cannot do this, period.
Okay, that's a dual relationship, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to Denise if everybody's ready. Denise, a long-haul truck driver. Now, this is just a truck driver, not a paperwood hauler, for a large national carrier. Injures her back, is unable to function in her current position. Aptitude and performance tests are administered and labor market research is performed. And the results indicate that Denise will function well in a position as a dispatcher, a position for which there is an opening with her current employer, as well as other positions comparable in terms of the required skills and aptitudes. Dawn, her rehabilitation counselor, suggests that she apply for the job of dispatcher. Denise would perform the job of transportation manager, and that's a position that requires computer skills. And Dawn knows that she will lose her workers' compensation benefits if she goes into training instead of taking the job that is available. Okay. So, does somebody want to address this one? Tell me where the ethical pitfalls are, or is there any pitfalls? Is there a pitfall? Yes, you would be correct. And this scenario is based on some of my clients I used to work with private counselors a lot. We would share clients, and they would have clients that they could provide certain services. And the fact that if they didn't do what was approved by the insurance company, the benefits would cease. We had to keep that in mind when we were making our plan and making our decisions.
In this situation, I would leave it to the client to make a decision about what she's willing to do. Our obligation would be to make sure she has an informed choice. In other words, all the benefits and risks are carefully explained to her, and she then is left to make a choice. That would be the ethical thing, I think.
Okay, thank you. Could you tell me what the upside and the downside is of her going to the training?
Well, the statement here says that she would lose her workers' comp benefits if she goes to the training. And
that would be the big one.
And I would think that would be a significant issue to consider, sure.
What do you think about your mandate to help her reach the highest job possible? Do you think you have a...
Well, that mandate also speaks to the client making an informed choice. Sometimes the client does not want the highest job possible.
Why? So from an ethical standpoint, if we give all the information to the client and the client makes the decision, we can pretty well be assured that we are in our ethical guidelines, can't we? And I like this one. I would like to hear everybody's take on this. A rehabilitation counselor working with a client who has a brain injury is unsure whether or not the person fully understands the implications of the decision to participate in a rehabilitation plan. Although the implications have been previously explained, how can the counselor support client autonomy while ensuring the client is fully informed before consenting to the plan? What do you do to ensure that the client understands everything that you're telling them? And do you think that is an ethical problem or not? I had a lot of clients that I would wonder and worry later that maybe I didn't get it clear enough for them, or they didn't really understand, especially down the line. We'd run into problems, and I felt like they didn't understand. Sometimes I could correct that by having another conversation with them, and sometimes there was no correcting it because they had a learning disability or they had a brain injury. And sometimes people with brain injuries can grasp certain ideas and not other ideas.
Mhm.
How do you handle that?
Terry Murphy says, have them repeat it back and discuss. And Jennifer Hawkins says, talk to them, have them explain it in their own words.
Oh, good. Good idea. Anybody else? But I put this one in here because it was always a concern of mine. I felt like it's hard to know. And particularly, and for myself now, I can understand something really good today, but this time next week, I may have forgotten half of what you said to me. I go to my doctor and he goes, okay, do this, this, and this. And I go home, and about 3 weeks later, I'm going, what was it he said? So you might want to reiterate when you see the client a certain points, the important points, make sure that they understand, and that is an ethical issue, to make sure that they are on the same page with you at all times. This is about the counseling relationship, and Sarah's a general caseload counselor who has been a counselor for 25 years, and she's planning to retire at the end of the year. She's mentoring 2 master's level students who will begin their work as counselors after graduation next year. And Sarah tells the students they shouldn't work for the agency and gives them names of some of her friends in private practice. She contacts these friends and advocates for the students. Sarah is also thinking of working with a private agency with her friends next year and thinks that the students will be a good addition to the team. Has she just stolen some good counselors from the agency? Is there an ethical problem here, do you think? Or maybe not?
Yes, there's an ethical problem here.
I agree with you, Terry. I think that she just stole 2 people. I really do. She's in a position to sway these young people, isn't she? And she's in a position to know who's a good employee and who's not. And she's there as a agent of the agency and should be working for their good, not this place that she's going to go when she retires.
Wade says she is trying to bite the hand that feeds her. And
I agree.
Yeah, Boma also said earlier she agrees with you on the previous slide, having them say it in the way they understand it.
Thank you. I wanted to add to you why I included this slide. It is not based on my experience. It didn't happen this way, but I had a student that worked with me, a graduate student. She was finishing up her 4-year degree in vocational rehabilitation, and she was trying to make a decision on whether or not she should go into a master's vocational rehabilitation program or social work. I steered her towards social work because she had a really bright mind and she was really wanting to go forward. She had small children. She needed to make money. So I thought that was the better way to go for her personally. But I thought about that afterwards, and I wondered if I was being unethical where my agency was concerned, because she was going to be a good counselor one day. But I was trying to counsel her in the way I felt would be best for her, because we don't make much money, do we, as folk rehab counselors? And I think social workers do better in that department. And that's what I was thinking. And I thought she would have more ways of moving forward, moving up in the career if she was a social worker. I don't know. What do you think? Was I being unethical?
If you were speaking on for the betterment of a friend or a relative, and you're personally giving your personal opinion as to